Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure to introduce you to a debut author tonight, Ashley Winstead, joining us from Houston, Texas. Yay! And her book is called In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. And either Hank Phillippi Ryan, world's best interviewer and host, I'm always in awe of how well she does it. I'd be even more in awe if I turn off my phone. Where was I?
We want to know who's calling, Barbara.
I think it was, looking at it, it was spam. And I only had my phone on because I had a question I wanted to start out with, but I actually got emailed to myself. Anyway.
I bet it was somebody way more glamorous than that. We will all speculate about who that is.
So, Hank Phillippi Ryan, winner of at least 39 Emmys for her amazing television journalism career and author of, I don't remember how many books that have won all kinds of awards, including serial Agate Awards, and whose most recent adjective in her reviews is the word stellar, which she loves so much she puts on all of her communications, which I really like. So Ashley, this will be fun for you to talk to a superstar here.
Oh, it's a treat. An honor.
It's delightful. So Hank is joining us from Boston. I'm home in my office in Scottsdale, and I'm holding up an advanced reading copy because Ashley signed our books, but they're somewhere between Houston and Scottsdale just at the moment, so I can't show you her signature. But this is a very impressive debut, and I would certainly recommend that you order an autographed copy. And Patrick, who is lurking offset and will come back for questions, will put a buy link for Ashley's book into the comments field should you wish to click on it. So having said all that, is there anything I left out, ladies?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure you said enough what a good book this is. You might want to say that again. It's absolutely riveting and brave and compelling and dark and wonderful. And talk about a superstar, Ashley. Congratulations on this book. It's quite amazing.
Thank you so much, Hank. That means the world.
Well, it truly is. Actually, I was going to leave it to Hank to say all that, and she already has, but she'll repeat it. I did have a question that I would like to start us off with, and it comes from a little bit of personal experience of my own, but in an interview that Ashley did, she talked about, or actually, here's what she said. Why am I paraphrasing it? The fictional Duquette University, which is the dark campus aspect, dark academic aspect of this book, is based on some real life universities like Vanderbilt, which Winstead attended as an undergrad, but also Duke and Wake Forest. She's familiar with the experience of elite Southern universities. Elite Southern colleges are all about striving, just like Jessica, the heroine of this book, and they have such a chip on their shoulder about being as good as the Ivies. It kind of permeates the student body too, which I explore in the book. Now, my comment is that when I graduated from high school, and amazingly, 1958, I was lucky enough to be able to go anywhere I wanted to. And the three universities that appealed to me the most were Stanford, I was in Chicago, so Stanford University on the West Coast, Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and Smith College, which at that time was strictly a women's college. So I ruled out Smith because I thought, why go to college with just women? That just didn't do it for me. So my parents took me to see Duke. Now I thought, having seen his gorgeous Gothic campus, I mean, it looks somewhat like Princeton, I thought it was going to be so glamorous and so wonderful. 1958 was 3 years after Brown versus Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court desegregated schools. Durham was experiencing constant race riots. The gorgeous Gothic campus was just for men. The women had a small campus that was walkable, but because of the race riots, women had to be escorted by a bus with armed guards from their campus to the gorgeous Gothic campus in the event they had classes there. And I looked at this and I thought, this is going to be way too much culture shock. But my vision of Duke as this elite university, that was just shattered. Now, I mean, some of that was just the time, but I never really got over it. So I ended up at Stanford as, the default, having ruled those out. But your comment about elite Southern colleges and, the the chip on their shoulder and the class system under which they operate, because to some degree they do, really resonated with me. So tell us why you chose that as the landscape of your book, because I mean, a book is a huge part, I think, of the setting that you choose for it.
Yeah, I love that question so much. And I can hear like my Vanderbilt alumni card getting revoked as they hear that quote. I don't think that this book really could have worked as well as it did anywhere else. So, not only was I like, it was convenient to some extent to place this book in a setting I was really familiar with, but the kind of scene, the Southern Ivy campus, like it's right there in the name. Like schools like Vanderbilt and Duke and Wake Forest and a number of other schools, over, at least when I was there in 2008, and I think even more since, really are strivers themselves as colleges. There's a lot of a talk and emphasis. Each one lays claim to being the Harvard of the South. That's something each of those schools will tell you they are. There's a lot of financial and all sorts of investment in climbing up the US News and World Report rankings. And my own experience at that school and, experiences of others who went to similar schools was just that sense of, all the students who went there, we didn't get into Harvard, like we didn't get into an Ivy. And so this is the school that we're at is a good school, but it's not the Ivy. And then I know I'm probably going to get so much hate mail or, hate emails over this because everyone's so proud of their school. And I'm so proud of Vanderbilt too. I really did love going there. But there's this sense that, like I said in that interview, just kind of permeates that you're like, there's some sort of, within the hierarchy of the world, you haven't quite yet climbed to the top. And that's something that is just such a part of Jessica Miller's psyche, that to me, the setting matched the character. It was kind of like an extension and a mirror of this character.
Well, the other part of my comment, and then I'm going to shut up and turn this over to Hank, was that when I went to Stanford in 1958, Stanford was exactly like that. It had a chip on his shoulder. It was not the Harvard of the West. While I was there, the genius of Stanford was that it poached most of the professors in fact, all the professors it wanted from the Ivies by the simple expedient, because they had land. What they did was they offered everybody not only a decent salary, but they offered them housing. So people could come from living in, relatively modest surroundings if they were teaching at an Ivy League school, or part of the salary was just the prestige of teaching there. And they came to Stanford and they had freedom, they had money, they had a home in the whole bit. And while in the 4 years I was there, well, 5 with graduate school, transformed it. And now it's unapologetic. Nobody ever calls it the Harvard of the West.
Oh, no, it is Stanford. And you want to go there as much as you do Harvard.
I was there when it happened. And then when I was getting my master in library science, I took classes at Vanderbilt because it was so much better than the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where because I lived in Oak Ridge, then I had to take classes. So I've been the whole spectrum of what you wrote about in your book.
I love that. That happened to me too. By the time I went back for my own reunion, like Vanderbilt had torn down all the buildings that I remembered, including my dorm, my freshman dorm, and had built like beautiful, gorgeous replacements that could be, neo-Gothic replacements essentially. So
excellent. All right, Hank, I'm done. I'm just going to drink my wine.
Oh, it's wonderful. No, Barbara, you can talk and talk. I'll just listen to you too. It's always wonderful. It's
just so funny that, when I read that, it just resonated with me and, and 2 or 3 different levels. And, an advantage of leading a really long life is that you have lived long enough to see significant change.
Definitely so. And I think one of the things that you really touched on so beautifully, Barbara, is the thing that Ashley mined so gorgeously in this book, is that we really do relate to that. We all have some, whether it's high school or college, wherever we went on the spectrum of anywhere, we're aware of what it's like to be the new kid, to be the outsider, to come into a situation that's formed and see where we fit into that. And then that is just, I mean, that's what Jessica does in this book. And was that fun to write?
It was fun to write, mostly because I used writing this book as a form of catharsis. So I channeled a lot of my own experiences and got to take them to kind of great dark, places. But yeah, so I would say definitely fun to write. Also felt completely risky. It felt like, you know, um, I was really just ripping my heart out and putting it on the page. And obviously, no character writer conflation here, but there's a lot of me and Jessica and in all of the characters in the book. And so being as honest as Jessica is about what she wants and what she'll do to get there, that felt like I was revealing a piece of my brain in a way where I wasn't sure how that would be received. So it felt like a gamble.
No, when you said it was risky, I agree that the book is risky because it's just so out there and it's all on the table. And Jessica, the main character, is very forthright about what she wants and how she feels about it and how far she'll go to get it. Let's start at the beginning though, because if people haven't read the book and maybe they haven't and they should, as soon as this is over, just go to that link that you'll see on the Poison Pen page and get your signed copy of the book before they're all gone, because they will be. The book is about the East House 7, a group of college kids who come back to their 10th reunion. And there was a murder when they were back at school 10 years ago. And this murder no one was ever convicted of it. It was not really solved. And they come back to their reunion, and suddenly this murder is in the forefront again. It is sinister, it is dark, it is sort of Lord of the Flies on campus. It's risky in a really gorgeous way. So where specifically did you get the idea to write about a college reunion, and what happened before and what happens after?
Yes, I just have to say I could listen to you and describe my book forever. That's amazing. And so the year I started writing In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, I had two experiences that were kind of ended up being the seeds of the book. The first is that I went to my own 10-year college reunion, and I was very excited to go back. I had a lot of anticipation was high. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And so I went to college. College was like a mythical place. It took a village to get me there. And I felt deeply privileged to be there. And I really, in my head, both before going to college, during my college experience, and then certainly afterwards, I mythologized my college experience into this really like the best years of my life, essentially, and like the place where I became the person I was supposed to be. Like I bought into that. And so when I went back for my 10-year college reunion, I really did think that it would feel the same way that it used to. I borrowed a little bit on my own feelings in describing Jessica's, like, this sense of magic that's in the soil of college. And so when I went back, I was completely underwhelmed, not because the campus wasn't beautiful. Like, as we mentioned, it only got more beautiful since I'd been there.
You said they tore buildings down, so you weren't even seeing the same place. You weren't the same.
Yes.
The school was physically not the same.
And all of that hit me like a punch to the gut. And I had this experience where everyone was celebrating and, homecoming celebrations and festivities. And I broke away from the crowd and just walked around campus trying to feel that feeling that I had 10 years ago where the world was my oyster, anything could happen. I'd finally made it, you know, and I had this experience of grief in which I had to let that part of my life go. I wasn't that girl anymore. You know, it was 10 years later, you know, not as many opportunities, or my life couldn't be exactly anything. And so that was an interesting experience that I didn't fully, wasn't able to really articulate to myself at the time. And so fast forward months later, I experienced a really profound professional disappointment in my writing career. And it was this moment where, so I was part of the Pitch Wars mentor program, and I won't dive into all the details of that, but yeah, essentially at the end of this mentorship program, all the unagented writers who are the mentees, which I was, you know, I've just spent months frantically revising their manuscripts, and all of the manuscript, like excerpts of the manuscripts, go up on the Pitch Wars website, and agents flock to the site to make requests. And so it's a really high pressure, high stakes thing, where you are succeeding or failing, not only like in hyper speed, because there's so many agents participating, but also a little bit publicly, because when the curtain is drawn and you can see all of the agent requests under everyone's various manuscripts. So it's like, you know, a really competitive thing. I didn't do well in this program. All of my wonderful friends were doing really well. You know, they had very different experiences. And I had this like dark moment, this dark night of the soul in which, you know, I was very over dramatic. Like for writers, this is par for the course, right? And it's like, okay, get over it. But this was a moment where I really questioned whether I was ever going to make it as a writer, because this felt like the cap on over a decade of trying. And so I had this moment where I realized I couldn't even pick up the phone to call my mother to tell her how deeply jealous of my friends I felt, or how ashamed I felt that I wasn't good enough to have been successful. And because to feel that way itself was shameful. And in order to like do something, put these feelings somewhere, I started to imagine this woman who became Jessica Miller. And I saw her very vividly, like electric and alive, in front of her bathroom mirror, poring over her face, looking for flaws. And that became an early scene in the book in chapter 1, where she's kind of assessing herself and how she's changed since college as she prepares to go back. And as soon as I thought to myself, wow, you know, I feel very compelled to write this character who's grappling with really shameful things. It feels like electric hot, you know, the shame and worry about talking to anyone else about this. So that's probably something I should write about, I guess, because I'm a masochist or something.
You're an achiever, and you're a type A person, and that's why you persisted. I mean, so the Pitch Wars book wasn't this book at all. It was a different book.
Nope.
And isn't that amazing? Because if they had loved it and wanted it, you never would have written this book. That's the only reason that this book exists, is out of what you perceived as failure, which wasn't. It was the next step to this wild success. And the idea that you channeled your feeling of change for this during this reunion. I've got to tell you very, very quickly. I went to my reunion. I think it was the 30th reunion, and I was really excited about it. And I thought, you know what? I've done it. I'm a television reporter. I'm good. I'm not the nerdy, geeky outsider person who never had a date ever. And I opened the door to the really. No.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Oh, you know, sister. Okay, so I opened the door to the reunion. So I opened the door. I'm all excited, and I thought, oh, I'm in the wrong place. These are all somebody's parents. and then I thought, oh no, these are my classmates. And I shouldn't tell you this, I honestly had to go into the ladies' room and I cried because it was such a moment of realization of how I'd changed and how we'd all changed and how, we feel the same inside all the time. But, this was just a mirror of how life had been. So, sidebar.
I love
Anyway,
that.
going on to Jessica,
Yeah.
who weaponizes this reunion, though. She decides to use it to prove things. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, Jessica in the mirror is not critical of how she looks.
Well, Jessica in the mirror is both convinced that she is, the most beautiful and the most perfect, and also like at the flip of a switch, convinced that she is the worst. And there's like voices that are battling inside her. So Jessica, our main character, is, very type A. Ambitious is almost too weak a word for her. She's kind of obsessed with being the best, not just good, but exceptional, not just smart, but brilliant. And so this presents as very narcissistic, and it absolutely is, but at the root of it is, this idea that she has learned about the world from her family, especially her father, which is really only reinforced by the world outside, and especially her college that she attends, which is that life is a meritocracy. And that sounds like a really benign thing to believe, and maybe even a good thing. But when you dig down, for her, what it means is if good things are happening to you and if you're winning, then that means you've earned it, that you're worth it, that says something fundamental about who you are. She's not able to see like the arbitrary nature of a lot of what happens in life, that this is like a causal relationship because life's a meritocracy. And conversely,
and so because you're successful, that means you're good. Even when, especially at Duquette, you can be rewarded for doing something really awful. I mean,
yes.
and she realizes that she can also use that. She doesn't have to be sort of philosophically good. Good just means winning, and that is very dangerous.
It's so dangerous, and that is a perfect, like, that's so beautifully stated, because she was like banging her head against the wall. She can't win using the rules, the fair rules. She can't win fair. And so she sees that she can win dirty, and she can do that. And that there are a lot of different ways to win. And even you can play dirty without getting your hands very dirty. And so this becomes a really seductive thing for her. And it's something that she learns and teaches herself really actually fairly early, but certainly through college. It informs her adult life, and she comes back to college for this reunion weekend, with all of these dark arts that I guess that she's mastered.
And you know what? And her power, I mean, we're talking about In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead, a brand new, fantastic book set in dark academia. But what Jessica uses is she's empowered by envy. I mean, it's all about how she just wants everything, and she'll just do anything, as you say, she'll do anything to get it. It's about success and so much ambition and so much envy and so much covetousness. We're fascinated by her. We don't like her, but we can't wait to see what's going to happen. And that's a juggle for a writer as well.
Yeah. That is another thing that felt very risky in writing this book, is that I knew that I wasn't writing a likable character. And to some extent, it was a little bit of an experiment with, just what can I get away with this in writing this character? Where will the reader follow me? To what depths can these characters sink? And the reader will still be with me. So the feedback is ongoing as the book is out.
But that's what Buzz is about, right? That's what it's all about. We're all talking about what would we do, and is she really bad, and what about the other characters? I mean, talk about the East House 7 a little bit, because as a writer, when I see you writing the East House 7, I'm like, Oh no, that's a lot of people. How about the East House Four? Did you ever think of the four? And yet in the book, they're so differentiated and they're so fully formed, each of them. And we can envision them and we understand them and we begin to learn what they want and what they're after and what they've sacrificed or stolen. How did you do that so beautifully? Juggle 7 people, maybe 8.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that is also what my publisher said to me, or my editor, in our first email communication. She said, when I got this manuscript in my inbox and opened it up and saw how many characters that were being thrown at me, she was like, this is not going to work. And somehow it did. So I spent an obscene amount of time preparing before I started drafting this book, doing relationship mapping and character development work. So I started with Jessica and Heather Shelby. So for those who haven't read, Heather is the girl who dies in college, their senior year. They were my 2 kind of touchstones in the friend group. And I really spent a lot of time developing who they were, what they wanted in the world, what they misunderstood about how the world worked, and really wanted to make them at odds with each other so that Heather especially just really tested Jessica and like really challenged Jessica. And then from there, I worked on developing characters who were, of course, hopefully, fully fleshed out and had their own lives and desires and backgrounds. But what I was really concerned about is making sure that each of the East House 7 related to Jessica and Heather in really strong ways. So they compelled something out of Jessica or challenged her. And Heather threatened them because of what they wanted most in the world through like the character development. Heather threatened that. And that is what I thought in my relationship mapping would make me like allow me to pull off each character's seeming really believable as a suspect if who Heather was challenged who they were, their identity.
I mean, it's almost Agatha Christie-esque. I mean, there's the Poirot always had a group of people, any of whom could have been guilty, and then something happens based on those relationships and what they all care about. So it does have that traditional mystery element of it in the most contemporary psychological of ways. Talk about your relationship mapping. That's so fascinating. Yeah. I mean, physically mapping, like with Venn diagrams and lines, or how did you do that?
I did. Well, I'm a little old school, so everything is in a Word doc. And so it's just a wall of text. It's a 42-page document, which, yes, I highlighted. Every character had their own highlight color. That's about as like artistic and visual as I got in this process. I probably could have thought of a better way to do this, but yeah, I subscribe to the Story Genius, the Lisa Cron craft. I don't know if you've encountered that craft book, but I think it's fantastic. It argues that basically you get to your plot through character work, and your plot of your book can and should really emerge organically out of pushing your characters and taking away they're like the third rail, like the thing they care about the most. And so if in my dreams I hold a knife feels like a long torture experiment for each of those characters, that's why, because I was literally trying to do that.
What is college but a long torture experiment?
Right.
That's exactly what it is anyway. So out of this character work, when you knew you had Heather, who was the victim, and you knew you had your main character, Jessica, how did the story emerge from that? Did you know your story and then weave them in? Or was there this conflict and then you wove the rest of the story in, if that question makes any sense?
I think it does. And you can tell me when I start to answer if I got it wrong. So I always knew how the book was going to end. Like that ending I had almost as soon as I had the beginning. And so that is truly where I started. I had these, beginning and end. And I knew who who Heather would be to our main character, Jessica. So because I knew how it was going to end, that, I'm going to not spoil anything, but
Right,
that
no,
really
no.
informed a lot about the relationship that those two women had. And so from there, I wanted, it kind of just things spun. I wanted each character to take a turn in the hot seat. That, so very traditional, in some ways very traditional, cycling through your different suspects. But I also was determined to, with each new revelation about a character's secret, and their, like, the layers of their relationship with Heather, I also wanted to use that to redefine who Jessica was and have her be finding out new things about who she is in other people's eyes. And most of the time that revelation experience is very painful for her. Again, I really, pulled no punches for Jessica, but it really, the plot did, once I figured out all of the characters and what Heather was going to threaten for them, it kind of flowed. I almost wrote it in a
and it makes it so, I don't want to say easy, because it's wonderfully complex, but it makes it very understandable to read, because we're learning about the things as Jessica learns about the things, and it's incremental one-on-one. And I don't know what the flashing light is behind me. If you see that, that is just some sort of camera thing, so try not to look at it, but now you're going to look at it.
I thought it was Jonathan watching television. I was sitting there when
he is watching television, but way in another room. So I have no idea what that is.
I'd like to interrupt with one comment. This is a very contemporary story, but Hank has touched on it, the sort of Agatha Christie quality, and you've touched upon it as being traditional. So two ways that I see that. One, this is not Poirot so much investigating other people as Jessica investigating herself and her life. Yeah. So the investigation is more inward than it is external. But the other thing about dark academia, and I've talked to Tess Gerritsen last night about this, because she has a new book that is set on a campus, and J.T. Ellison and I have talked about this as a sort of outbreak of the Gothic, that the campus, the college, replaces the country house in an Agatha Christie book, or the ship in Death on the Nile, or the train in, Murder on the Orient Express. Now, you need some sort, and that's why I started out asking you that question. You need some sort of closed landscape within which you're going to have people operating, or otherwise it's just going to diffuse out into a universe, and it'll be, you can't investigate. It's just too big. And so I think the campus is a really interesting variation on the traditional country house murder. And, it confines and defines what goes on in it. So I did really like the fact that this is such a contemporary uptake on a very traditional golden age kind of form, which Hank obviously does too, or you wouldn't have asked that question.
Exactly. I mean, more and even cooler, though, that more of us have been on college campuses than have been on country homes or on the Orient Express. I mean, it's very familiar. And we're also familiar with, sort of the toxicity of that petri dish, of that closed environment of college. Another, I don't know, revelation so much as a confession from me is I went to a college that did not have sororities, because I didn't want to give people the chance to turn me down. And I just thought, if there are no sororities, I cannot be rejected. How sad and cute that is, how almost pathetic, not almost pathetic, but you see what I mean, is that I was trying to steel myself from being upset. And Jessica throws herself right into that. And she has her serious goals about that. Talk a little bit about that culture.
Yeah, Jessica throws herself in because she's convinced that one day she's going to get a different outcome. And so I guess not to use that old cliche about the definition of insanity, but she really does. So the world of Duquette is a hierarchical, steeped in hierarchy. And this was very true of my college experience. And I think is like, I'll make the bold claim of saying that it seems to be quite endemic to a lot of the Southern Ivies, which makes the setting, particularly work in that way. But not only are you in a competitive academic environment, but the social life is stratified. So Greek life is so huge in a lot of Southern Ivies. And it just, when I went to college, I didn't know, a sorority from a fraternity, basically. No, I knew the Latin roots, but
Yeah.
I had never encountered this before and was absolutely mystified by Greek life. And Jessica is too, but what she does is she very quickly understands, okay, this is yet another testing of my mettle, yet another way to be assigned value. I'm going to ask, in some ways, Jessica's like an eternal optimist. I guess I'll give her that. She's going to ask the world to sort her. And
it is like that. I mean, it's right out of Harry Potter, and it's so easy, isn't it? I mean, it is.
Yeah, no, it is.
Someone
Yeah.
is going to choose you.
Yeah.
Be in a certain place with other people who they deem to be like you.
Exactly.
Which means that you're not like someone else, and you are branded with that. You are labeled with that, and she strives for this. It's very sad. I mean, from my standpoint, watching Jessica, it's very sad to see, and very honest in your book to see how much that means to someone at that time.
Right. And I'm going to throw in another perspective based, again, we're all being confessional here. Stanford in 1958 had fraternities, but they had banned sororities.
Oh.
And so, long story, and I don't know that I know the actual history of it. So you arrived as a freshman woman, and you were arbitrarily chosen to live in a dorm you didn't pick with people you didn't know. And thereafter, there was a lottery in which you were assigned a new place in a new room. So basically, you had no power at all. You had no choice. Meantime, the men were in a traditional Greek fraternity environment. They already had more social power from the get-go, right? And so it was really reinforced, and it was so powerless. There was no choice available that I found that extremely hard. And it was only when I went on to graduate school where, you wind up in communities based upon your, your course of study or where you happen to live or whatever it was. So I was driven to get married when I was a senior because I was so miserable in that environment. It turned out to be a poor choice, but it was almost bound to be because, I didn't learn that part of college is learning to navigate the social world. Sure. It isn't all about academia. And, we didn't get that. And so in a way, it wasn't a full college experience to be in that environment. My mother, meantime, had been president of the Delta Gamma House at Northwestern University. So I went off thinking I was going to have the Greek experience and that I knew about it. And then I didn't research Stanford well enough to know that wasn't going to be my choice. So, I think part of college too is the unexpected. You think you know what you're going to get, and then it turns out that you didn't know you needed it, or you didn't know it was missing, or you got it and you didn't want it. There's so many variables that come in to play. But I felt completely disoriented the whole 4 years I was an undergraduate, and I'm sure that's why I got married so unwisely at age 20.
Isn't it fascinating? I mean, even that shows how college can affect you and how difficult that environment is. When you were talking about being assigned by lottery, I thought, yeah, that would be a relief. That would be great. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. It's just catch as catch can. So it just shows you how each of us is different and each of us goes into a different environment. And exactly as you say, Barbara, in college, you learn how to deal with that. Or in Jessica's case, you don't quite learn how to deal with that. Let me fast forward a little bit. I don't want to run out of time, but I do want to ask you, about your dialogue. The dialogue is so incredibly good. And I mean, Courtney, the character of Courtney,
My
I,
favorite.
I'm so sorry, forgive me, but I really laughed at that. She is so brutal and so filterless. Talk a little bit about her and the dialogue in general, and whether you enjoy writing dialogue. I mean, you must, because you're
It's
just
my
so good at
favorite.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
I keep trying to send my agent fully dialogue novels that she
Yeah.
insists I add other things to. No, I love writing dialogue. There's nothing that I like doing more. And Courtney was my favorite character to write because I don't know what this says about me, but I sank into her voice very effortlessly. Maybe it's just a little bit of wish fulfillment, because you're absolutely right. Like, Courtney has no filter. Courtney is brutal, but she is also she's here to ruin, to, like, smash and shatter your ego. But sometimes people need their ego shattered, and she provides a good service in various scenes of doing that. But I just absolutely loved, and there's a chapter from her perspective as well, and that was a wonderfully fun chapter to write. I let myself go, and kind of, drew on however many years of, comebacks that I didn't get the chance to say.
Exactly,
And, like,
exactly. I mean, I envisioned you just typing as fast as you possibly could, saying,
yes,
I love it, I love this, I love this.
that
Really
was, yeah.
great, really great. Let me just read you. One of the things that I also loved, one of the many things, obviously, that I loved about your book was is the bonding of the students, and how they come together and connect. And Jessica, let me just see if I need my glasses for this. Do you mind if I read like 2 lines?
I would be
Jessica,
honored.
they're all together early on, and they're preparing to go to a party. And they're talking about, pre-party stuff, how early we should start drinking in East House before walking to frat row. I leaned back and watched. She's watching her friends talk. I leaned back and watched. All around us, fireflies dotted the air, sparks of light, here and gone. Tree branches swayed and stalks of grass lifted with the breeze in time to some secret song. I could feel it, humming and weaving around us, the lawn and the trees and the brilliant dying sun, knitting us together. It was magic. It was my new religion. Each of them a star on earth, pulling me in with the force of their gravity. I was theirs. In that moment, I gave myself over completely. I worshiped them. I died and started new right there in the grass in the center of the lawn. But you are making me cry. That is on just so many levels gorgeous, and the whole book. Do you remember writing that part?
Oh yeah. I definitely spent a lot of time there in that very scene. So thank you. That really means a lot that you read that. I wanted to convey, Jessica doesn't come from a family that supports her, or, there's a lot going on in Jessica's family. And so she's looking for a family. She finds it in the East House 7. And as much as there's darkness and there's jealousy and covetousness between them, especially from Jessica going out towards them, I also really wanted to capture the fact that she genuinely loved these people, and genuinely loved the experience of being at college, which to my mind makes it all the more tragic that things play out the way they do, because there's so many opportunities for different choices to be made. And so in that moment, and that you read, that's Jessica's very first experience when this group of people come together. If you, being a new person and an outsider, that moment where you suddenly find yourself included in the circle, and you realize people are looking at you and counting you as one of them, that moment of inclusion where it feels like a gift that you haven't quite earned yet, but you're so determined to earn it and to prove to the people who've given you this inclusion that you're worth it. I was trying to kind of convey that sense. Yeah, which again just makes everything that happens all the more tragic.
No, it's so sad and so poignant and so full of foreshadowing. I'm looking at the time because we're running out of time, but I want to ask you a couple more questions. But it also shows, but briefly, it also shows that passage. This is not just a thriller. This is not just a page-turning thriller. This is not just a really good, risky, brave, wonderful story. But this is a beautifully written book. I loved it. I think it shows incredible talent. It's immersive. You know, it reminds me a little of The Secret History, Donna Tartt's The Secret History. It's that feeling of that there was this bond and then it gets shattered in some way. And you handle this by having it in dual timelines in 10 years ago and in the present. How did you decide on that structure? And that must have been just great to write. I know a little bit of a juggle, but still so revealing.
I never thought of it being structured a different way. So I always knew it would be past and present. And first of all, just thank you so much. That means the world. And so for Jessica, she says really early on, the past is still alive to her. Like her college years are a tape that's still rolling. And for years she's been talking and no one's been answering. But when she goes back to homecoming, it's like it's going to pick back up.
Right.
And so the past is very much present to her, which was, I felt like, okay, then we have to, I need to impart upon the readers this feeling too, that it is alive. And also, what better structure to just really, hit your readers hard with some emotional gut punches than the back and forth to the past, because, when something kind of tragic happens or there's conflict in the present storyline, I structured it so that then you go back in the past and you see like the beautiful promising seeds of what that could have been. And so, just to again do the gut punch, even make it even stronger. But I was also really determined to, in the past and the present, weaving back and forth, not retread ground. So even though I was jumping back into the past, kind of almost one-to-one throughout the book, I wanted the past to reveal something or change the shape of the present in a way that would hopefully be exciting to the reader, so that the last thing I wanted was the readerly experience to be like, oh man, we're going back into the past when all the action is in the present,
right.
or vice versa. So I was trying to kind of weave it so that each chapter, like timeline, really challenged and reshaped the next.
But how you do that then is by making the past not the past. The past is the now of then. You're in the present of the past, if that makes any sense either. I mean, so it's not like, oh, I remember that time, or here's a flashback. It is, you are on the campus at the time that Jessica is on the campus and at the time that all these things are happening. And that's one of the reasons that it's just so compelling and such a page turner, and also so gratifying for the reader, because we begin to understand, we kind of know what happened when they don't. And that's this dramatic irony of all this, that in some cases the reader knows more than the characters do, which makes it all the more poignant. But from a writerly point of view, you had to write about 10 years ago. You had to write about what was happening 10 years ago versus what the world is like now. Was that a balance for you?
That was, though. I was really, really so I graduated college during the height of the Great Recession, and so had this really interesting experience in which, hyper competitive school, the environment that we've discussed already, and yet an even greater turn of the screw, because suddenly senior year for everyone's jobs started disappearing. All of these like fellowships and opportunities that everyone had competed for a long time were taken off the table, and there was sort of this mass sense of where do we all go now? and I guess we're all going to grad school. You know, and so like now we're all going to compete with each other for grad school. And so I was really determined to have their college experience be during that exact same time, 08, 09, because I think that like that was just a really unique time to to be entering the workforce and like figuring out who you're going to be. And so I really wanted to play with that, and the housing crash, the way that plays, the kind of the rug gets pulled out from under everyone.
And everything you thought your life was going to be suddenly changes, and you have to figure out what to do. And that's the other thing. I have 3 more questions, Barbara, if that's okay, and quickly.
We're not in any time bind. Hey, just take all the time you want.
People have their real lives, even though I love talking to Ashley. It's a psychological thriller, which means there is violence, but it's more about the violence that people do to each other emotionally. Yes. And how did you balance that? How did you think about that? The devastating psychological damage that people can do to each other.
That was what I was most interested in. So, the violence is definitely present, but it is, contained. But really, the psychological and emotional violence is just the book is rife with it. And so I was not only really interested in the way characters were, enacted psychological violence against each other, like even using things like weaponizing the girl code to try to manipulate your friends into doing something, or thinking about how when you enter a social scene, where you stand, like a social scenario, where you stand and how you can maneuver in that scenario to gain an advantage, and how sad it is to be doing that, find yourself compelled to do that even with your closest friends. But I think the heart of the book for me is this idea that the worst antagonist sometimes can be your own brain. And so there's a violence that Jessica enacts against herself. So I was really, really fascinated by the idea of repetition compulsion, which I know is the Freudian idea connected to trauma theory, that when you experience a trauma, sometimes people feel compelled to return to the site of the trauma. And there are a lot of different reasons you're compelled to do this. It seems completely an irrational thing to do, but in some ways it makes sense, because your brain thinks, if I can go back and master it, it'll have no power over me. And so this is very much a logic in the book for Jessica, is this sense of repetition compulsion, which is something I was also trying to draw out in the past and present timelines. Like, so you can see a wound that Jessica experiences in the past or enacts on another character, and watch them tragically just do it over again 10 years later. And of course, going back to college is like the return to the trauma. Jessica has been wounded, and she's just keeps going back to the site.
That's why people are drawn to reunions, right? This time they're going to prove that they're successful, that they were good, that all of you were wrong, and I persevered and I prevailed. Is that where the title came from? I wonder about the title. I mean, it's very cerebral, and very much so. If Jessica in her dreams is holding a knife that changes everything, where did that title come from? Was it always called that?
No, it was originally called East House 7. Which my editor smartly and also very kindly told me immediately I could do better.
Very sweetly.
Yes, exactly. And so she asked me to just spend time brainstorming and really send her titles as they came to me. And I, being the type A person that I am, sent her probably 352 titles. I know I'm a darling person to work with. So no, she was also very kind, and I hadn't hit on it after a while, and I was getting frustrated, and I reread the book, and I saw something that I didn't even realize I had written into it, which is that from the beginning, Jessica's ambition is a knife. So she's stabbed with jealousy when looking at Heather and Courtney. She, she feels, feeling like a knife in the gut. It's just, there's so much stabbing imagery and knife imagery. And she is also haunted by this sense that she has done something very wrong. That it's coming back to her a little bit in her dreams. It is at the periphery of her consciousness and her mind. And so this knife is the knife of her guilt, her ambition. And so it is a very much more abstract, cerebral kind of thing. But I do like the tension between the knife and the scissors, because that's kind of the question that haunts the book. What did Jessica hold? Did she hold a knife, or did she in fact, hold a pair of scissors, which is.
And it's not so on the nose as that she's dreaming about what happened. It's that she's psychologically dreaming about what happened, and that makes it all so gorgeous. So you have a PhD in American literature, and isn't this what you would have told your classes to do? To read the book and look for the theme and see what the author really meant? I mean, it's so much fun for you as a writer, I bet, to go back and say, "Oh, that's what I meant."
I love it. Sometimes it's very painful to go back and reread your work and say, oh, okay, I was really trying something really hard, and I don't know if I pulled it off. But this experience was a good one, because it just clicked for me. And I just saw, and I will say, like, between writing a lot of critical nonfiction during my academic career and writing fiction, the thing I love about writing fiction is that I don't have to know what I mean when I write it. I can come back and later and see what I mean. And also readers can tell me what I meant and what it means to them. So I love that part of writing fiction.
That is going to be my favorite quote of all times. I don't have to know what I mean when I write it. And I think, truly, that is a very freeing thing for an author to understand. I mean, Sue Grafton used to call that the magic, that we're writing something that we don't even know what it is at the time, and we will see it later, and to just keep going. My final question for you tonight, although I could go on and on, obviously, is what a crazy, wonderful thing this is being right now. I hear the buzz about this book everywhere. The New York Times absolutely loved it. This is something that you struggled for. I mean, when you think about the person you were when you were so upset about pitch wars, and now the person that you are now, what do you think about that?
It's so affirming, and I learned how to process grief and failure in the course of writing this book. And so if it gave me nothing else, if it wasn't the book that was my debut book, then it was a book that I had learned a lot of things about, just how to be in the world. And so for the fact that it is also my debut, and that also seems to be resonating, I feel like I'm making a connection with people in ways that I didn't imagine. And I don't know how to say it other than it's just this like very affirming sense of like support and love. Not to be too cheesy here at the end, but
No, and you're completely right. What you're feeling is true and honest approval and applause and standing ovations, and people are loving this book. And it has been such a joy to talk with you about it this evening. Thank you for being so generous about your answers and so thoughtful. It's just been wonderful. I wonder whether the audience has any questions.
Well, I'm going to ask, but I'm going to make an observation as Patrick comes in, which is the magic of being a bookseller is that intuitively you get to know what people that you're familiar with will want to read. And I knew, because Hank and and Ashley have never met, but I knew when I read this book, this was a Hank book.
Oh,
And I actually wrote ruthlessly over the publisher who had a different design for tonight's event and flatly refused to do it unless Hank would do this, because we've done this in the past. And I know you were pleased when Chris Whitaker won the Gold Dagger Award, because again, he was a new author to you and to me, but I knew that you would love this book. And I knew that you would love Ashley's book. And, you know, it's a real joy to put people together that otherwise might not ever have met through the magic of reading and understanding what kind of books different people gravitate to. I mean, Hank's a brilliant interviewer, but you know, not everybody loves every book, right? But I knew that you were really going to like this one. I could just see it. So I'm really delighted that it worked out as well as it did. Patrick, are there any questions?
Not many. There's one from Paula Meunier, our friend.
Oh, good. Hi, Paula.
Paula.
And she says, how many points of view do you use in the book? Do you use all 7? And how did you make that work?
That's a great question. I actually really fretted about how to structure this. So it's told mostly from Jessica's point of view, but also 3 additional characters. So not every member of the East House 7 gets a POV chapter. And I didn't know if I could do this, but I just did it. As I slipped into a different character's POV when they had something to confess. So that was the trigger. When there was something that they had to confess that needed to be told from their perspective that Jessica couldn't know about. And I thought, you know what, this is the only way to tell this story. So I hope people are willing to, you know, ride with me on this. But yeah, so confession was the logic.
You know, Ashley, people don't always know what it is they will ride with until they're presented with it. I mean, that's another really fascinating thing, is that a really original voice, it always feels risky to, you know, to the publisher and to the writer and so forth, but it's the really original voice that can start a whole new direction, isn't it, Hank? I mean,
And I think that technique, the reason it works so seamlessly is that it makes sense. It just makes sense. It's logical. Mm-hmm. And so it isn't that it's, you know, stuck in to make your story work. It's emerged because that it's meaningful. It's the whole structure itself is meaningful, and also is sort of a beacon for the reader. Here's what's coming now. So it makes sense on every level.
But it makes sense for this particular story.
Yes, sure.
You know, I mean, it isn't necessarily a universal. I've always loved Robert Eversys. It was a wonderful writer who deserved a much better career than he had, but he once said something which I've always believed, and which I've said often, that every book has 3 forms. Every book has 3 forms. The first one is the book that the writer conceives and is perfect in the writer's head, right? This is the book that you imagine you're going to write. And the second form is the book you actually write, which isn't necessarily the platonic, glorious image that you had. Mm-hmm. But the third and acid test of every book is that each reader makes it unique to his or herself. Each reader has a different experience reading the book. And so, you know, this book is one thing to Hank and probably another thing to me and another thing to MT, and all of those are valid. But the real surprise for you as a writer is what all those are, because that's what you find out when you go out in the world and you go, oh my God, is that what they thought? Or did I, you know, is that what I really said? Or how did you get to that interpretation or whatever? And so the book, you know, winds up becoming a living thing, you know, absolutely, across the board. And I think Robert really had that right. I always think of that as, you know, the ideal book and the actual book, and then the book everybody made their own, is a terrific way to look at it. So nothing's really a mistake. You know, it can be whatever it needs to be for that particular book. And then you could write a completely different book next time.
Are you writing a completely different book next time? Did I hear this?
Final question. Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay.
Am I writing a different book? Well, I have 2 books coming out next year. But my next thriller I'm very excited about. And I don't know how much I could talk about it.
You don't need to. We just want to know that you're actually writing another book, so we will be excited to know it's coming.
Yes, much to my agent's chagrin, I have written many manuscripts over this last year and a half. I don't know, I've gotten some bug in me where I just can't stop writing. And so I have my romance debut coming out in April. My second thriller is coming out next August. And what I can say about it is I call it my rage book. And it is a cult revenge thriller, a little bit dark academia, a little bit domestic suspense, and a lot revenge. So yes, the wheels are turning over here.
Well, I am going to my mailbox as soon as I can, expecting you to send me those books.
Absolutely. Oh, my honor.
Right,
Yeah.
Barbara?
Absolutely true. I was thinking about vindictiveness and how wonderful it is. Just hang on a minute after we sign off, Hank, because I have something I want to tell you. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Ashley, what a great pleasure it's been to talk to you about your debut book, In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. The cover is symbolic. You will see the knife and you will see the scissors. Autographed copies are coming our way. And I can't urge you enough to buy one because this is clearly the start of a really impressive career. Thank you very much, Hank, for doing the interview. And good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.